In this next series of lectures, I'm going to talk about infectious disease. So in this first video, we're going to sort of differentiate between what is a disease-causing microorganism and then what is sort of that normal human microbiota and where it comes from. So we know that we are exposed within our environment to all sorts of microorganisms. Microorganisms are pretty much ubiquitous to any sort of ecosystem, and so they're really found anywhere. So our body surfaces are exposed to them all of the time, right? And so I'll get to talking about how we establish our normal biota, but when we're exposed to something that is a pathogenic microorganism, if that microorganism is able to get into our body and pass our host defenses, so all sorts of different areas within our body have actually everywhere within our body, our immune system is functioning in order to fight off anything foreign that comes in, and we'll learn in detail about that when we cover immunology. But if the bacteria or the microorganism is able to get in past those host defenses, establish itself in the tissue, and start to multiply, that is what is called an infection. And it's said to be pathologic if that infection then starts to damage or disrupt the tissues. And whatever that disease state is, so whatever disruption is happening to the body and the symptoms and the signs of that, all sort of define an infectious disease that's caused by a pathogenic microorganism. But keep in mind that, pathogens are a very minimal part of what we're exposed to in microbial diversity. A lot of microbes have no effect on us at all. Some microbes become part of our normal or resident biota. They live on our skin or in our body, and that we actually have a symbiotic relationship with them where they actually help us to digest our food or perform other functions in the body. And then some of those organisms are said to be commensal, right? So they live within us, but they don't really do any sort of harm. So the human body is full of all sorts of different microbes, specifically the areas that are exposed to the outside world, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But our normal resident biota is a lot of what sort of affects our overall health. So the study of metagenomics is basically being used to profile or look at all of the microbes that are within the body. So taking a big sampling of microbes from maybe a feces sample or from the skin or some mucus. And basically what we can do is we can run genetic analysis on that sample, and we can find all the different microbe species that are living in that specific person. So the Human Microbiome Project really is this project to try and catalog and categorize and genetically analyze all of the microbes that sort of live within a human or on a human. And this is specifically important because now we are finding that a lot of diseases are being linked to some of the functions of the bacteria that are part of a person's resident biota. So we've linked stomach ulcers, gastric ulcers, stomach cancer to bacteria, Helicobacter pylori. We're starting to link Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all sorts of different rheumatoid arthritis are being linked to the function of the bacteria that are living within us. So it's important for us to study and be aware of what is on us. All right, and in a few slides, we'll talk about how we actually acquire that resident biota because you're not really born with it. Right, so where is that stuff living, right? It's not everywhere within your body, right? There are some areas of our body where we eliminate or try to prevent any bacteria from moving into, specifically like your cerebrospinal fluid. You don't want your brain being exposed to bacteria that could potentially harm. All of your major organs are, like your heart and your, the exterior of your intestines, your kidneys, all of these things are sort of on the outside, locked off and sealed from bacteria that we don't want moving in certain tissues of the body. But anything that's seemingly exposed to the outside world is going to have some normal presence of bacteria. So on your skin, in your respiratory tract, your gastrointestinal tract, any of your urogenital tract, in your ear canals, your eyelids. So there is anywhere where bacteria are, or your body is exposed to the environment, there's going to be resident biota. Whereas those microbe-free sort of areas are within your bones and in your muscles and in your lungs, liver, also all those major organs, your cerebrospinal fluid. These are the kind of areas where we have this seal between the outside world and the inside of our body that would prevent bacteria from living. So your resident biota can fluctuate based on a lot of different factors. It can fluctuate based on your general health. So if you're immunocompromised, you might have a different variety of biota, or some things might grow better if your immune system isn't functioning properly. Your age, what you're eating, your general hygiene, your hormones, drug therapy. So all sorts of different things can affect what biota you have in your body. And they actually say, when you look at the idea of fecal transplants, so some people, if they have digestive issues, one of the new treatments they're sort of coming out with is to try and reestablish your gut flora by giving you a fecal transplant. And typically what they do for a fecal transplant, unlike other transplants, right, they always want to try and find somebody who's a match, somebody who's genetically close to you. But for a fecal transplant, they're looking for somebody who lives in sort of your same type of environment and would have the same gut flora. So your husband might make a better donor for a fecal transplant than, say, your mother who lives across the country, even though you're genetically closer to your mother than your husband. All right, so within the body, you have a whole bunch of different microbes that are antagonizing one another. So we talked about antagonism in the microbial growth and nutrition lecture. And antagonism is where you have bacteria that sort of competing for resources. So a lot of these natural biota that are within your body are competing for the resources within the body, and so they're kept in check and they don't grow out of control. Right? But let's say one type of bacteria becomes compromised, then that might allow another bacteria then to grow out of control, and it is part of your human biota, or your regular normal bacterial flora, but it starts to grow a lot and starts to do damage to the tissues. And in that case, that could cause an infection, and it's called an endogenous infection because it is an infection that really comes from within you. And a lot of that times that happens when your immune system is compromised or when you're taking specific kinds of drugs. So one of the most common examples I like to give is when women take antibiotics quite frequently, they can end up with yeast infections. And the reason is because the yeast and the bacteria in your vagina are antagonistic, right? They're competing with each other for resources. So as soon as you start taking an antibiotic, it kills off the bacteria and it allows the yeast to have access to a whole bunch of nutrients, and therefore it can kind of grow out of control, and it can result in a yeast infection when you're using an antibiotic. All right, so where does this stuff actually come from? You're not really born with a bacterial flora. Your body, when you're in the womb, right? The placenta is pretty much blocked from any sort of microbes crossing into it. There are some that can, but it's pretty rare. So it's sort of one of those sterile environments. But as soon as the baby is born, during the birthing process, and then in exposure to anything in the outside world, you start to establish that flora. So we are, putting, like, babies are always putting things in their mouth. They're, breastfeeding. They have bottles. Like any sort of exposure to the world is going to help to establish a baby's normal gut flora. All right, so in the next lecture, I'll start to talk then about not the normal biota that an organism has, but actually pathogens and how they establish themselves in the body.